Hi, I'm Ryan Savino. I'm a social worker and a clinical intern at the Wellness Center, as well as a doctoral student in the social welfare PhD program at the Grad Center. The purpose of this video is to provide a brief overview of a workshop that I co-led titled Strategies for Managing Stress in Graduate School. So in the workshop, we focused on um, a group of strategies that students or really anyone could try to use to manage stress. Most of the skills come from a therapy approach called dialectical behavioral therapy. So this approach tends to focus on skill building, um, to change the relationships between our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and behaviors. This workshop targeted each of those categories, those skills that you might use to try to change your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your bodily sensations. So since mindfulness is an important component of DBT and the workshop, it's helpful to start with a brief definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness is not clearing your mind, rather the focused awareness on the present moment. And that's because we must be aware of the present in order to act intentionally and effectively. Another area that we emphasized in the workshop was self-compassion and non-judgment. So since grad school is already a challenging place, when grad students face roadblocks, the self-compassion tends to wane, and they can become extremely self-critical. The problem with um, self-judgment is that it fuels our negative emotions and ends up prolonging the suffering that we experience in response to events that are definitely challenging. Um, Self-judgmental thoughts also tend to be rigid, and they offer few productive paths forward. So one of the first steps that could be helpful when trying to address, trying to become more self-compassionate, is to mindfully notice the language you're using. Um, so you might notice that your thoughts, not necessarily things that you speak aloud, contain words like should, or I must, or I always, or I never. Or you might find that you're labeling yourself as bad or lazy. So that's a sign that you're engaging in self-judgment. The first thing that can help is to mindfully start to attend to those thoughts and to notice them. Um, and there are a series of exercises that can be helpful for that. The next step would be to try to remove the judgmental language and to restate the thought rather than saying, I'll never learn this material, I'm bad at school. You might learn to say to yourself, restate um, that this exercise is challenging, but I know, and I know I have the resources I can use to get help. So it's a critical first step to try to become more self compassionate, and it's in and of itself highly regulating because we're giving ourselves permission to feel what we're actually feeling. Uh, Another category of skills that we talked about are emotion regulation skills. So the purpose of emotion regulation skills is not to make your thoughts go away. Instead, the goal is to help you to better understand your emotions and to learn to act effectively and authentically with those emotions. So we talked about a few categories of emotion regulation skills that have different targets. So some of those targets include physical sensations that we're experiencing. So a student might practice an exercise like breathing retraining or progressive muscle relaxation. There are some helpful scripts for that. Or even something as simple as trying to ground yourself in your five senses can be helpful in the moment, to ground yourself in the moment. There's a DBT skill involving uh, called tipping the temperature that we covered. And basically what that does is it activates the dive response. So it's like an evolutionary um, reflex almost that mammals have, that's sort of like down regulating. Um, so it tamps down on like essentially anxiety. So basically how one would do that, how one would activate this dive response is by taking something cold, usually like an ice pack, and placing it under one's eyes. um, you can respond. You can learn to respond differently to your thoughts through emotion regulation skills. The most helpful way to do that is by using a tool to help identify some of the unhelpful thinking styles that you might become prone to. So you might start to notice when you're drifting forward in time and predicting the future, or if we're trying to engage in mind reading, trying to imagine what somebody else is thinking about us without actually knowing if they're thinking about us at all. Or we might start to notice that we're engaging in catastrophizing, so thinking of the worst case scenario. Another major category that we might respond to is the urges that we experience when we're having an intense emotion. So the actions that we engage in um, almost reflexively when an emotion becomes overwhelming. So one of the more concrete ways to respond to that is through problem solving. Um, so we might start with a detailed description of the problem. We might check the facts to make sure the emotion we're experiencing fits the facts. Um, and then we might start to identify a simple and achievable goal. So to break it down, so what could I do to feel okay? Next, we might try to brainstorm as many ideas as possible to try to address the problem situation. And then we might pick a feasible solution or two, and then weigh them out by weighing out the pros and cons. Um, and we might proceed through those steps, step by step, uh, until we try out a solution to the problem that seems to work. The last overarching skill that we talked about is something called opposite action. Um, so when we're experiencing a strong emotion, we might have an action urge to respond a particular way. So for instance, if a person feels anxious, their action urge might be to avoid the situation. So if we're anxious about writing a paper, our action urge might be to avoid writing the paper, to procrastinate, or to distract ourselves. When we give into that urge, it tends to fuel the emotion and contribute to it, even though it might feel really good in the moment, to avoid the thing that's making us anxious. Um, Opposite action tells us that to change our emotion, we have to do the opposite of the action urge. So if the urge is to avoid writing the paper, or we instead write the paper, it's not as simple as that necessarily. Um, so it's helpful to learn to do um, the exact opposite. And it's not the same as quote unquote just doing it. A good first step is to validate our emotions, to engage in some of the self-compassion we talked about earlier. And it also takes quite a bit of effort and practice. This is just a brief overview of some of the categories of skills that we talked about in the well-being series. So we'll have some of the resources on our website. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you a little bit about some of the skills we covered in this workshop. Thank you.